Hey guys, so I'm Dave Robles, for those who don't know, and I'm joined today by Ian Ally-Seals and Carl Mefferd. So for those of you again who might be new to Rare Earth Comics, uh, we are a small independent publisher from Hartford, Connecticut, and we've been putting out a lot of quality books over the last couple decades. So we've got Ian Ally-Seals, who is our editor-in-chief, as well as one of the primary writers in the company, and Carl Mefferd, who's a writer and fantastic illustrator, who's been putting out work with us for quite a few years.
I'd like to note that Carl got fantastic in his
Yes,
introduction,
he
and we're
did.
like, Ian exists.
Ian, he's here. He's a placeholder
Also,
mostly.
Dave is a shameless flatterer,
Yeah.
to throw that fantastic there, especially
Yeah.
considering the kind of art that he makes.
Yeah. Thank you, Carl. For those who may not know me, I'm Dave Robles. I'm one of the illustrators, art director, and sometimes art hack. So as far as a little bit of history on Rare Earth Comics, we've been putting out books, like I said before, for quite a few years. We started when Ian and I were much younger, more hair or less gray hair, and putting out books like Rare Earth Chronicles and Shadow Tracers, Channel Guard. And then over the last decade or so, we've really introduced some new blood, particularly, Carl Mefferd, Jeff Tingley, Jen Harris, and other people. So if you haven't had the chance, please go on the website, rareearthcomics.com, check it out. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and you can follow any of the artists. Once you go on the website, you can see the links. So today we're going to mostly be talking about some of the projects that we're currently working on, particularly Ian and Carl, and kind of delve a little bit into their personalities, their art, their work, what drives them, what motivates them, things like that. So yeah, I'll get started by just kind of asking about stuff that you guys are currently working on. So whoever wants to take it first.
All right, I'm going to throw that to Carl real quick.
Great.
Oh, all right. Let's see. Well, some of the stuff I'm working on right now are, let's see, I've been doing a lot more work for webtoons lately, just because I like the immediacy of it, the fact that I can just put together a comic, not worry about printing, like formal publishing and distribution. It just gets out to people and they read it right away. Although it's a little weird that I would say that one, because so many of the webcomics I've been posting to there have been on hiatus for way too long, just getting busy with a lot of stuff. One of the big projects that I'm working on at the moment is actually trying to put together a package for publishers that would feature a larger version of the story that I did a standalone version of, called Falling Awake, and that's available at the website. And right now I've got a much bigger story in mind for that premise, and I'm trying to package it up and share with publishers, basically.
For me, it's a really interesting kind of place to be in for Rare Earth Comics right now, because Dave, if you remember, I mean, this started pretty much with you and me, and it was a way for us to be getting our stories out. And for the longest time, that's kind of what it was. And even as people kept coming in, the stories that we were publishing were always stories I was writing, whether it was Channel Guard or Rare Earth Chronicles or Doctor Atlantis or Shadow Tracers. Ian Ally-Seals was kind of written all over Rare Earth Comics. Right. And that was never the intention. It was just kind of the way things fell. And in recent years, especially after Doctor Atlantis ended, when book 5 came out, my role in the company really changed as Carl started putting out his books with Falling Awake, and Jeff Tingley just started putting out Heretic Hex one after another. And then all of the webcomics, all of the work by the Harrises, such as Dungeon Minis, which are fantastic. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I find myself in a real publisher position where I'm not necessarily putting out new product, but helping to facilitate other people's work, which was always the point of Rare Earth Comics. So on one hand, I'm a little jealous of all of this great work that's coming out, and I want to get more of my stuff out. So what am I working on right now? I mean, there's a lot. I know you and I have graphic novels. We've got the Shadow Tracers graphic novel we've been working on for about the last 40 years.
Seems like it.
But I'm really excited about that. There's a web series that I'm developing with Jeff Tingley. Like, it's one of the great things about Rare Earth Comics is we have this close-knit community of creators, and when we can all work with each other, it's a great experience. You know, it's so that's what I'm doing. I'm getting my feet back in the water.
But Ian, don't forget, and even though it's not really a comic, like it is something that's keeping you busy, is making your own movie, making your own like car chase movie. That's gotta be time consuming.
That's true. It's not exactly a Rare Earth Comics project, but yeah, that's always been a thing for me. Is, you know, I'm a film student. I went to film school. I've worked in television. I've worked in television with you, David, and so it's nice to be able to work in both mediums, in film and comics, and how they bleed over. Like, it's a great thing when I get to talk to both of you. It used to be at comic book shows about what's happening in a movie, and just talking and working on comics gives me ideas for movies. And then when I work on movies for a little while, I love working on comics. So yeah, and believe me, Carl, I love the project I'm doing there right now, but I want to make some more comics. It's Comic-Con at home week. That's what we're here for.
Right. So, you know, as we reminisce about, you know, stuff that we've been, you know, working on in the past, and you know, you talk about the graphic novel that we're going to be doing in the relaunch of Shadow Traces and everything. But one of the great stories that, you know, I've heard a bunch of times, and, you know, I love hearing every time, is kind of how Carl got, you know, roped into this madness that we call Rare Earth Comics.
You're talking about '98.
Yes, the infamous Inkfest 1998. So you want to take it away?
I'm going to jump into that. So a little background. I'm not going to go into the whole story. We'll talk about that in another interview, how me and David met, which is lore onto itself. But how our first book came out, which was a science fiction title called Channel Guard, which I am very, very proud of and never want anyone to see, because I'm very proud we did it.
And I like it. I like the premise.
Fun.
Fun. The premise is solid. I may return to the premise, but I'm the only one who has copies of that book, and I'm just saying, let's remember it.
Other than the ones we sold.
I got my copies.
So, but I want to talk how this got made. So, David and I had known each other all throughout high school. For me, middle school and high school, and we were part of a very vibrant and supportive inner city comics kind of coalition, a group of comic book people from the inner city of Hartford, which was sponsored by the Hartford Current. It was called the Metro Bridge, where they would bring kids from Hartford together and give them a page in the newspaper. And so that's where we all met. And so I had been working on this science fiction comic, Channel Guard. I'd been putting Rare Earth Comics together and just trying to make a book that we could sell at, I think, a Big Apple Con, you know, the infamous
Carbonara shows,
Carbonara shows, and the inker, who was, you know, he was in his 20s or something like that. I remember, dropped out about 1/3 of the way through the book, and I just went to all of you and I said, help. And so all of these comic book, all of our friends who were artists came together in my parents' house one night, and we said, well, we have a 24-page book right here, and we have to ink it by the morning. And we really did need to ink it by like noon the next day in order to get it overnighted on FedEx to the printer in Canada. And you had to send the originals out in those days. None of this was digital, other than the cover, which we had to color that night too, on like one of those iMac Blueberries. Mine was like one of those. So anyway, so we're doing this, and now Carl, you were in middle school at this point. So I was a senior in high school. You were in middle school, and it was the same school. And you were also the brother of a good friend of mine, and I, you know, your sister. And I knew you were an artist. You were an art kid. And so I think I called your sister and said, hey, does Carl want to come and like fill in blacks on this book tonight? And so he came. How old were you then, Carl? Were you 13?
I don't, maybe something like that. I only have the vaguest recollection of this. I remember being at your place. I remember working with pages, trying to handle the ink. I don't remember having the slightest idea what I was doing. I don't know that I appreciate the stakes of it. I just remember receiving a page and being like, "Yeah, fill this in with a black ink in this little area." It's
Well,
like,
I'm gonna
okay.
I'm gonna stop you there because I remember it perfectly, and this is what I remember. So
Hmm.
we've got this whole group of, and these are fantastic artists. This is even at this early time: Dave Robles, Tony Negron, Merton Burry. Who else did we have? We had other people there too, right, man? Oh, Sheldon Mitchell,
Yes.
fantastic Sheldon
Mm-hmm.
Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
So who, I mean, Google his name right now. You'll see
Yeah,
amazing
yeah.
stuff. So we're all in this room. My father's been making pots of coffee, and Carl is in the corner of the living room, sitting on the floor with a lamp. And Merton Burry, who at the time was like the best of all of us, would first just walk over to this kid he's never met and drop a Bristol board page in front of him and say, fill in all these blacks. He's like, okay, all right, you got a Sharpie. You're just kind of going in and filling in the blacks. And by like 2 a.m, he's going to Carl with uninked pages, dropping them in front of him and saying, you're fine, ink the page. Just do it. And I remember him doing that and
Okay.
at him and being like, and I would look to Merton and he'd be like, he's fine. He'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
I need to see
Classic
which
Merton Berry.
pages those were, how the inks look. I need to see that, like, sometime in the next few days.
So that's how Carl, that was Carl. I mean, it was years before you came back in the fold with us, but that's how it started. And I remember that perfectly.
Right. And now hadn't he made some kind of promise to you about working with you, like as far as on a project like Doctor Atlantis?
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
You want to take this,
And
Carl?
Yeah.
I feel like all of these stories you'll be able to tell a little bit better because you have the benefit of age for remembering the details.
It's a
But
benefit now.
I
Okay.
do, I I do remember it's sometimes a benefit. Ian can fill in some of the gaps, but the main thing that I remember was Ian just telling me the general pitch for Doctor Atlantis, and it was so different from how the actual comic turned out.
Oh,
But even at the time, I was nuts over it because I actually, fact about me, I grew up watching the old Disney movie of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
Mm.
like
Oh yeah.
again and again. I watched that on repeat. I was obsessed with giant squids and the deep sea and all that stuff. And this premise about like this giant, like impossibly huge steampunk ship that sailed the open seas and like kind of mixed it up with giant sea monsters just sounded like such a cool idea. But some of the other details, the main character sounded like way more of a villain than an actual hero, and that was one of the big. Ian, maybe you can take it from here and
sure. I
fill in
mean,
some things.
going back to that early experience in when you were in middle school and I was in high school, I think it might have even been like the morning of after Inkfest '98, where we're just kind of sitting there at dawn. I'm like, man, I've been coming up with a story. When you're a little older, you want to draw it, and that sounds so pejorative. But then what's funny is, I mean, we're talking nearly 10 years later,
Oh,
more.
more.
Like you and I had never seen each other in that amount of time. And I just
Hmm.
start getting like Facebook messages from you or just emails or something saying, hey, listen, Ian, I'm an illustrator now. I'm going to
Hmm.
art school. I make comics for real. And that storyline you came up with when we were kids, you want to do it? And at that time, for me, that was a really pivotal time. I had been going through some pretty intense personal drama, kind of some real life upheavals, and I didn't know if I wanted to make comics anymore, and that it just felt kind of safe right then when you brought it back, where I'm like, maybe this will never happen. I can just write and not care about anything else, and really you pushing me to write brought that back. And even though the story of what we have is very, very different from that little pitch at Inkfest '98, the
Mhm.
seed is still the same. What if the earth really was flat? This is before anyone was taking that junk seriously.
Yeah. Let's not go
But
there.
in a science fiction way, what if the earth was flat and the ocean did go everywhere and the ocean was like outer space? What if you had essentially Star Trek on the open seas? Um, and everything else we had may have been left, but that seed, that idea of looking at the earth as a place of endless adventure and possibility and unknown is what stayed. And what I loved about it when we started collaborating is the things you started bringing, because you are a student of history as well, and so you would start bringing to me podcasts like Hardcore History and things like that. And I realized at that point that my science fiction concept of this endless world of endless sea of possibility, well, that's what it was really like. You're not like, for the majority of nautical history, that was the real experience. So even just in the writing of it, collaborating with you brought so many ideas. And that's what I remember about that first book. And it was originally not even a graphic novel. We were doing it issue by issue, of Doctor Atlantis 1.
Well, the main thing I remember about our collaboration with the first book was specifically how it seemed like, did you almost scrap the script and like rewrite it after you saw some of the initial concept sketches?
Yeah, I did.
Because
I had a script
yeah,
that
like,
was 50 to 70% done, and I just threw it away when I saw some of the concept sketches.
wait, I'm gonna be curious what that original script was, but I didn't know what he was writing at the time, and I was just like, okay, we're doing a high seas adventure. I'm gonna draw some sea monsters, and drew a whole mix of them, and one of them was the I always mix up the lad names. What was the name in the final book? The giant.
It was originally Cephalometreus, because I don't know anything about animals, which I found out is a clam. It's Astacadimetreus, which is kind of a giant crawfish.
Well, now I'm picturing the Atlantis duking it out with a giant clam, so it's gonna have to be the next book.
There you go.
But yeah, I showed him like the initial sketches of the various kind of sea creatures, and that's when we got the first issue.
Yeah.
And what was the original idea that you had before the concepts?
My God, I don't even remember, man. I really don't. Okay, well, I'll give you two. Because I had actually written an entire book of Dr. Atlantis a year or two before that I think Sheldon and Merton were originally going to do. And it was very dark and it was very serious. And if I remember, it was Fowler, Dr. Fowler, alone on the ship with his dog. There was nobody else, and he's just going through the ocean, and he goes into this sea of like algae, which starts eating apart the ship like the Blob. And he's alone trying to figure out how to get out of this and what to do. And it was very, very kind of Vertigo inspired. Like, it was almost dialogueless and silent, and it was terrible. I'm sorry. I'm not saying that concept is fun. I mean, it's a neat concept, but like when I looked back at that script, it was utterly joyless in a book that I try to find the joy in every issue. And I didn't really.
Like it would make
Yeah.
It would be a great Zack Snyder film.
Yeah, there you go. And like it was really like a 1970s post-apocalyptic film, like, you know, just and it didn't gel with me until I saw your concept art. Until I saw the concept art of the monsters and the ship and Fowler, where I found his voice and I found how I wanted this book to sound.
Oh, wow! I actually didn't know that. Just how deep that went. And I feel like we've stolen the interview a little bit away from Dave, who
no.
Sure
By all means, this was about you guys. So I'm glad that you guys are kind of vibing and talking about it, because that's exactly what I was hoping would happen. So, Carl, you talked a bit about Disney, and Ian mentioned how, you know, Carl is a student of history and everything, and bringing to you some of the podcasts like Hardcore History. So when you know, had gotten the original idea and script, and were putting together the ideas for not Shadow Tracers, but Dr. Atlantis, what other influences do you think you kind of pulled into that, either from, you know, art or other areas, movies, film, your own life? What other influences do you think you pulled into Dr. Atlantis, at least initially?
let's see. Do you want me to start with that, or
Yeah,
Ian?
go
Do
ahead.
you want to
No,
take
I
it
was hoping
first?
to hear from you, Carl. Like artistically, like what were you kind of vibing from?
Artistically, I think at the time, especially when I did the first book of Doctor Atlantis, I was a really young comic artist, which I think you can see in the art. And honestly, I was just trying to make the page happen. I was just trying to get the pictures down, and I don't know if at that time I had the luxury and the confidence of exploring like deep artistic influences. But one of the things that started to happen as the series progressed was that uh, the the world that we start to establish within the first issue, the kind of the steampunk technology, some of the other powers in the world, like when you find out about the rest of steampunk England that's still trying to kind of conquer the world. When we start on that, it was almost like little bits of the world that I would then flesh out more in my mind. And I think that I had whole ideas of like maybe this was a parallel world in which like Atlantis never fell, but like instead later colonized England and then like used the like advanced technology to try and get elsewhere. Like I was coming up with some crazy ideas, but for me, that was where a lot of the creativity kind of came from, just trying to fill in the gaps from what I got in the scripts.
Any
If that
other?
makes sense.
Oh no, absolutely. Sometimes it's the script that you're provided. Having worked with Ian throughout the years, that's one thing that he does is he'll really fill the script with his vision of things. And there's a joy in having a writer who really has a vision, but is also accepting of the artist's interpretation and really kind of embracing that collaboration, and that final piece that really is an amalgamation of both the writer's ideas and concepts and the person who's illustrating it, and how those come together. That's one of the beauties of having two different people who, one who writes a book, one who illustrates a book. And you've worked in both ways. You've worked where you've written the stories yourself, and you've done scripts from other people. And that in itself has its own kind of cool vibe to it too. But I definitely do enjoy the two separate creators, and kind of that end result. So Ian, when you first got the first pages back, I remember looking at the first pages that I looked at from Carl's that he sent me, and my personal reaction being blown away, and seeing some of the stuff, and there was this life to it. There was this kind of um, simplicity and innocence, but at the same time, a real depth. It brings me back a bit to, not to compare styles or anything, but artists like Humberto Ramos, who has this kind of, animation influence in the sense of like the vibrancy of the characters, and some of the simplicity, but how dynamic and serious his stories and his art ends up becoming. That that dichotomy, that difference between the two things, really is really telling about the artist's depth. And so when you first saw kind of the pencils coming in for Dr. Atlantis, what were your reactions, Ian?
Um, I'm going to talk about two things in terms of that. And first is something that gets talked about Carl a lot, which is his speed. And it is having worked with you now for a very long time, and all of us have seen your work, uh, just the speed at which you draw, and but let me rephrase that, in which you draw with quality. There are a lot of people who can draw fast, and there are a lot of people that can draw good, and there aren't too many people who can do both at the same time. So it would seem, Dave, do you have this memory that like I would send you a script and the entire book would be thumbnailed in 24 hours?
Yep.
You might be exaggerated, but we're only exaggerating by about 5 hours. And then you would have breakdowns in 5 days. And you would have like the book done in under a month. So I've never experienced that before. Being able to see a book grow and explode like that. But that's almost, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the work you've done to be that fast, but that's almost like an innate quality. The thing that struck me when I would see the Doctor Atlantis page was how much emotion was in them. How easily it seemed, and that's deceptive because none of this is easy, how easy you could capture the mood of in a single panel, whether there are people there or not. That and it wasn't just in the way you drew. You knew what I wanted to tell. And some of that, I'll give myself a little credit, comes from writing, but you listen to a script and you find out what needs to be there. There was a funny thing. I remember I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I think during Doctor Atlantis issue 2. And I'm like, it's amazing because Carl sticks to my script. He sticks to it. He listens to what I want to do and he draws it the way I want it. And then I looked at and I realized you don't. you change things all the time. And sometimes we talk about it, and sometimes you just do it. But I didn't realize it because what I wanted to say was there. Right. So even if you were changing things, and most of the time, let's be clear, you were doing it for the better. You were trying to say what I wanted to say. Right. And I'll leave it at that. That's what from the first book is what I found amazing about your art in this collaboration. And it's just great.
That's really that is really good to hear, because honestly, so many times when I would finish the art, I would not be sure if I was like, because when you're a writer and when you are like a comic writer or a screenplay writer, you have a visual imagination, but you're trying to capture all these pictures and words, and then conveying that to someone else can be tricky business. And oftentimes I would be working on the art and being like, maybe Ian pictured this like totally different. Like, and I was just, giving it my best. So the fact that I was getting that close, and even sometimes when missing the mark, still hitting another mark that worked is good to hear. But I also want to, go ahead.
No, finish what you were saying.
I also wanted to follow up on something that you said, Dave, which I think that is a really keen eye about you were mentioning kind of an animator influence on my work, because that was something that's actually been true with my art from the start, that I've never actually done animation, but I've always loved the art style of animators. And I think especially Bruce Timm was one of the artists that, I grew up on the original Batman the Animated Series and just loved that style. So even though I wasn't really quite doing that myself, I was always at least attempting to get some of that energy in the poses and the expressiveness of my characters, which honestly in my early stuff I think might have been a little bit too expressive. Like some characters were like at an 11 where they should have been at like an 8 in their exaggerations, but if it works, it works.
Yeah, and it worked. Yeah, Dr. Atlantis, if you guys haven't had an opportunity to read it, is absolutely amazing. Give it a shot, because it takes you through this ride over the course of what's it, Ian? Maybe 10 years worth of time or more.
Oh no, there's a big time. There's like an 8-year time jump in.
There's a huge time jump, especially when the later characters comes into the picture.
Yeah, no, I think it's I don't remember from book 1 to book 5. I think it's 15 years that passes, and that was really important. And that was really important to me, because when the story of Doctor Atlantis really starts being a book about family, and about fathers and sons and fathers and daughters and siblings. The crew of the Atlantis is a family. And when you and I kind of gelled on that, I wanted to live with this family. Even if we didn't get to see every one of their adventures. Like, one of my favorite things you ever drew, and I will be humble enough to say, I think was written kind of okay, is the montage sequence when
Mm-hmm.
you've got
That again recently.
yeah, you've got like Amma Fowler, she's the stowaway on the ship. Her name isn't Fowler yet. And Chasat and Fowler find her. And she's like 5 years old at that point. He's like, well, we got to bring her back home. We got to bring her back to her island. We're going to do that. I swear we're going to do that right now. And then there's 2 pages of montage of like the 9 different adventures that they're all having, which all involves him saying, after this, we're bringing her home. And by the end of it, she's like 16 years old.
Yeah.
And what was also fun about that is that was where we got to throw in all of the weird all of the weird ideas that never made it in the book. Like I kept wanting to bring mer people in.
Mer people, yes, I remember that.
We're also like, no, we're not doing.
We ultimately have. I forget. I might have been a little bit too self-serious to go with the mer people. That might have been my opposition. But I love that we ultimately have 2 mer people appearances in the montage, and then once more at the very, very end.
At the very end.
Just a little thing to catch it.
We finally get the mer people in there. And so, but as time was going on with the series, like that's what I really wanted. I wanted to see this family, and how that family dynamic grows is stressed and pulled apart, and can they come back together? That's what draws. When I reread Doctor Atlantis, which I haven't done too many times, but I did it recently, and that's my favorite thing about the story, is how these 3 characters relate.
Definitely.
I mean, it's a compelling narrative because, like, if you look at the story as a whole, everything starts with Fowler as just this man alone with just his dog on the ship in the middle of the ocean, like the loneliest place in the world. And then as the story picks up, he finds his first friend, Chosat. Then he has like a daughter-like figure, and like goes from being completely isolated to, having this rich family. And I don't want to give spoilers on the ending, but yeah, I feel like it's concluded really well with the very final pages.
Yeah. For me, I mean, the part of the series that hits me the deepest, especially as a father myself, is the moment when, and it doesn't happen, I think, till book 5, when it's, I think, the tensest and most heartbreaking argument in the entire series, when Fowler and Chosat are just screaming at each other, and Fowler just kind of screams, "You are my son, and you will do what I say." And I chose that moment because at one point, it's the first time in the entire series that Fowler calls him his son, and it's a moment of anger. And so I've been wanting him to say that this whole time, but it can't happen outside of this traumatic event. And where does it go from there? And that's a moment that hits me pretty hard.
I remember in the art, I was really trying to nail that scene in the visuals.
And that's for I mean, most people who make comics or don't make comics, don't often have an experience the way you and I, and David, you and I as well, have, where you work with someone for years. And by the end of it, there's kind of a shorthand where one of the things I love about working with you, Carl, especially over all these years, is by the end of Doctor Atlantis, I would try to write scenes in ways that I knew you would excel with. I wouldn't be writing for me, I'd be writing for your art to greater or less results. And it's just a magical relationship. It's one of those collaborative things that almost only happen in comics, at least only in this way.
I still remember some of the long conversations that we had, especially around books 4 and 5, where we would just talk for long stints, just trying to hammer out what the plots would be, kind of just throwing ideas back and forth.
Yeah, and Dave, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's one of the things I want to address right now, which is everyone at Rare Earth Comics that works with each other are very collaborative. Collaboration is a huge part of making comics. That's not to say that a solo island creator like you have with Falling Awake, which we'll talk about in another video, that isn't amazing as well. Of course, it is. You know, there's something so magical about a singular vision, but comics lend themselves to collaboration. And by the end of Doctor Atlantis, we of course are equal creators on this, but I mean, you're writing this book just as much as I am. You know, certainly by the end, you know, who's the writer and who's who's the artist is very clear. That's Carl. But who's the writer? I mean, you and me were writing this book together. By the end, those are my words on the page, and I will take off authorship of that book. But you were writing it as much as I was, and you know, it takes a lot of time and a lot of trust to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Although there were some ideas that I was putting out there in the writing, which you were right not to take up on. I think there was one with giant clockwork robots, robot guardians in the last city, which we ended up not going with, which I think right call.
And I kept wanting to have the Atlantis marooned on a giant turtle. I kept wanting that, and I remember you kept saying, well, we'll wait on that. Let's wait till the next book to do that. I'm like, when are we doing the damn turtle?
It does sound like between this and the Mer people, like I was often the kind of the wet blanket in some of the story collaboration. Just being like, it's too silly. I don't want to draw that. Let's draw the living island instead.
Yeah.
It's more grounded.
Old Sutkalag.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Dr. Atlantis wrapped up. Do you guys ever think about, you know, kind of reapproaching it at some point, or even if you didn't, have you thought about what you would have liked, you know, to where you would like to see this go, if you were to, like, you know, ideas that maybe you never got to do? We talked a lot about what kind of ended up on the cutting room floor, but just visions for where this series could have gone, wherever to you know, be relaunched.
I'm gonna let Carl jump on that, and then I'll give my answer.
I'm totally open to that, and it's really a question of finding the time. I think that even though I do have a lot of projects on my plate, you know, if I'm allowed to tackle it in my own schedule, then yeah, I'd be definitely open to that. But Ian, I know, has a way more packed plate than I do. So if he can find the time for the script, then you know, we shouldn't make any promises to release dates or anything like that. But I'd be open to it.
So here's my answer to that. When we ended Doctor Atlantis, book 5 graphic novels, Carl. We did 5 graphic novels of this book. We were both done. Like, you and I were done with Fowler and Company. I mean,
Sure.
I remember
probably didn't help that book 4 almost broke me.
Yeah, oh my goodness. And so, like, we were like, we love it, and we're glad we're done. And it was 2 years later, I think. It was after, like, it was either at San Diego Comic-Con, or maybe it might have been SDCC or New York Comic-Con. We're in the show, and you're in the trenches, and everybody's doing commissions and everything, and you turn and you say, hey, you want to do like a Dr. Atlantis one-shot at some point? I'm not saying I can, but, like, you ever be interested in that? And, like, I was done with Dr. Atlantis. And the minute you said that, I went, yeah, absolutely. It was like, you know, you got this wall built in your heart. You got this wall built over your heart, and all it takes is a little nudge, and I'm just like, oh, man. Yeah. And I think the reason is I just love the characters so much. I've never had that experience where when I sit down to write Fowler and Chasat and Amma, it just flows, just because I feel them so much. So am I open to it? Yes. Can we find the time? I hope so. Yeah. And you asked, where do I want this to go? Yeah. Well, it's hard for me. I mean, it's a spoiler for people who don't know it. I want to follow the adventures of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I want to follow the adventures of Amma and Chasa.
Yeah, I don't think that's too much of a spoiler, because there's so much in this book. In these books, that I think that it's fun to imagine. Once people start to read this and introduce those characters, I think they're gonna feel the same way as you. Like they can't wait to just continue hearing stories about them, and that's one of the things about one of the many things about Dr. Atlantis. And you talked about family. You guys talked about seriousness and lighthearted moments, and these different situations and scenarios that happen within the book, and the anger and the characters, and all these different emotions they bring about. And that's one of the things about Dr. Atlantis is the message is about family, and it is packed with emotion. It is really a moving book. Um, and I think that as you guys have sat here and talked about things and talked about the book, the fact that you guys, just the expression on your faces when you think about the characters and the situations and the moments and the collaborations and everything else, I think is even telling of how passionate you both are about the book, and it really really does come through. So I want to start wrapping this up because I think that we've covered a lot about Dr. Atlantis, and I think that people should be at this point itching to click buy on the Rare Earth Comics website. But I want to give you guys an opportunity to talk about any last things you want to talk about.
I want to say one last thing, and then
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut up and leave things to you and Carl. So here's one interesting thing that happened from the beginning of Doctor Atlantis to the end. Is whenever anybody started reading the first book, I always knew where they were in the book if they got this expression of like, and what it was is there's the dog, the unsung, fourth member of the Atlantis crew, Edward the dog, a big Irish wolfhound. And I always knew where they were in that first issue when one of the lobstrosity monsters bites into the dog. And everyone's like, oh no, the dog is going to die. And I always knew, I would see that expression, then they'd turn the page and they'd go, oh, the dog's okay. And I knew in that moment I could never hurt this dog. That nothing could ever hurt this dog. Yeah. And by the end, I think by like the last page of Dr. Atlantis, which is somewhere about, the most of is 15 to 20 years time passage, that dog is still alive. I don't care about logic of internal universe. I don't care the fact that Irish wolfhounds live 6 to 8 years. That dog lives forever.
And spoiler alert, the dog inherits the ship.
There
so
you
go. Makes sense.
There you go. And so I'm just saying, if you start reading Dr. Atlantis and you get to that page, I'm not giving any spoilers on anything else. The dog lives. The dog lives. And so that's me. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Yeah. Carl.
I think I'm pretty good. This is making me think now about the different ways that we could continue the story. Mm-hmm. But honestly, at this moment, I'm just really excited to be, most of all, to be putting out these books again digitally. Cool. So, I always have a soft spot for having like a classic printed copy in my hands, and I love paper mediums. But at the same time, a lot of people are getting their comics on screens now, and I want to be able to go with that so more people can read this. So the fact that Dr. Atlantis is now digitally available for people to buy, and check out, I hope that a lot more people will enjoy this story.
Yeah. I mean, recently getting to talk with you about some of the redone covers or the new covers for the digital editions of the book, was really fun for me to kind of see these characters again from your pen. And, again, just absolutely amazing artwork in each of the books, and the new covers are fantastic. And Ian, of course, wonderful story. So once again, Dr. Atlantis, 5-issue series, 5 graphic novels, written by Ian Ally-Seals, illustrated by Carl Mefferd. If you haven't had a chance to read it, rareearthcomics.com, go on the website, go ahead and pick it up. On there, while you're there, you can start to look at some of the other stuff that Carl has done as well, like Falling Awake, another fantastic graphic novel that he's done.
And tune in the later in this week for another interview with Carl about Falling.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be doing a few more of these. Like Ian has mentioned, we'll be doing another one. We'll be talking about Falling Awake and get more detail about that. But absolutely check it out. Do yourself a favor. Read Dr. Atlantis. You will not regret it. All right, guys. Thank you.
Happy Comic-Con, everybody.
Happy Comic-Con.
Happy Comic-Con. And stay safe, everyone.